Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends and participants. Welcome to this session of our Quran 14 series. Last time we started discussing, in fact, the session before last, we started discussing the text of the Quran. And as I had introduced to you, basically all our background study regarding the Quran in our previous sessions was meant to lead you to the text of the Quran. And today that we are in position to study this text of the Quran, it is also essential to have a very clear background of the nature of the Quranic discourse. And you would be remembering that I had introduced this to you, that as far as the Quran is concerned, it has a very specific uh, category of addressees. And if we are able to understand that category of addressees, we would be in a much better position to appreciate the Quran. And you know why I am telling you this? Well, the reason is that generally the aura of the Quran, or the introduction of the Quran that we have before we enter into the Quran, of course, we know that it is a book of God. But because it's a book of God, we think that it should have an all-embracing addressee set, as well as the content that it takes into regard and discusses should relate directly to all of us. So remember, I have been telling you this, that the Quran was revealed 14 and a half centuries ago in Arabia, in the 7th century Arabia, and it addressed entities, denominations, or religious followers of certain religions in the land of Arabia. And one of the dominant denomination, I would say, in Arabia were the idolaters. They believed in idol worship. So a very large part of the Quran, almost two-thirds of the Quran, actually relates with this issue of idol worship. And the Quran actually tries to convince these idolaters that they have invented their own idols. They have absolutely no basis. They even regarded the angels to be the daughters of God. They worshipped them, and they thought that by worshipping these angels, they would be able to secure a place in the hereafter. And in the first place, they actually did not believe in the hereafter and thought that this life is all that there is, because how can the Almighty create such a huge expanse of mankind spread over such a large period of time? And they always thought that they'll just die and become dust. But if ever there is going to be a hereafter, then their own deities, their own idols, who, of course, they thought were living, would save them from the wrath of the Almighty. So this is how things progressed, and that is precisely the reason why idolatry, polytheism is discussed in such a comprehensive way in the Quran. So if we are not well versed with this background, we might start feeling this sentiment that why is it the Quran is always discussing idol worshippers, whereas most of us who are addressed by the Quran, of course, are Muslims, and of course, we don't worship idols. So this is the reason. And as I said, this reason is something which, if properly understood, will always make you feel that this is how the Almighty meant it to be. It wanted the belief of monotheism to prevail everywhere. And remember, the basic precept of religion is that a large part of basic guidance is already ingrained in human nature. So you see, our own human nature tells us what right and wrong are. It tells us what exactly something is when you start usurping the rights of others. It tells us what justice is. It tells us what righteousness is. So for all these basic goods, we don't need to go to any external agency. It is only in certain areas that this guidance is needed. So therefore, we have to understand that human beings, when they were sent to the earth, when they were sent to populate the earth, of course, they already had a greater part of this guidance ingrained in them. The knowledge of good and evil was already with them. And you must be remembering that I had also discussed a passage from the Quran in one of my sessions, that before all of us were born, the Almighty took a pledge from our souls, and we were witnessing the Almighty. and all of us, all the souls of mankind, were asked to believe in God, and the words that God spoke was, Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? And all our souls, all our spirits, so to speak, before all of us were born, all of us said, yes, you are our Lord, you are our God. So you see, this is something which the Almighty has already ingrained in our human nature. The fact that there is a God, the fact that good and evil are found in us, and then that realization that if there is a God, and if the concept of good and evil exists in us, then we cannot be left without being held accountable. So this is how we have to understand that a lot of basic guidance has already found in ourselves. It's at certain crossroads that we need divine guidance. One of these crossroads, for example, is that how can we get in touch with the Almighty? How can we worship the Almighty? Because you see, there is no human means to go and find out directly from the Almighty as to what is our relationship or how is this relationship going to be established. So this is one area in which divine guidance helps us. It tells us how, through the prayer, through the fast, through the Hajj, through charity, and through various other means, we can connect with God. Similarly, there are other human affairs also in which at times we are not able to take the right decision. So the Sharia of God regarding human affairs is also given in those particular affairs in which human experience, human knowledge, human intellect is unable to take a decision. So that would actually mean that as far as the Sharia is concerned, it just supplements the knowledge that we already have. It complements the knowledge that we already have in ourselves. And therefore, the content of the Sharia or divine law is very, very specific, and its corpus is very limited. The bulk of the Quran actually deals with the stories of the past nations, and these stories have been recounted before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his addressees to tell them that if they deny their messenger, if they also deny their prophet, then they shall meet the same fate which the earlier nations met. So therefore, the description of those nations is made in detail in the Quran. So with this background, I do hope that you will be able to enjoy the reading of the Quran, because now you would be knowing that this is how the Quran proceeds. These are the topics that it speaks of, and these are the details that it wants to divulge. Its basic issue is monotheism. It wants to root out polytheism from its base, and therefore it addresses polytheism at length. But as I said, being followers of Tawheed or monotheism in our lives, we already, of course, know that this is one of the greatest impediments in reaching God, that if we stumble into polytheism. And by the way, even today, there are nations in the world in large numbers who still adhere to polytheism. Thus, for example, our Hindu brothers and sisters. Similarly, some of our Buddhist brothers and sisters, a large part of China and India, which I would suppose accounts for almost a half of the human population on Earth, again, is related to polytheism. So also keep this in mind, in fact, that although polytheism is something which has gone from the Abrahamic tradition, and that too in a very specific way, but as far as practical polytheism is concerned, you still find, as I said, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Hindus still indulging in that. And even those people who are monotheists, like, for example, Muslims or Christians or Jews, they also have these very subtle forms of polytheism in which they every now and then indulge. Look at the Christians, that their indulgence is very blatant. For example, they regard Jesus to be the Son of God. Look at Muslims. They go to various saints and to various peers, and they think that these saints and these peers are going to connect them to God. And so therefore, at times, they start worshipping them in a way that they don't realize. So you see, deviation from this creed of monotheism is still found. But if you have this background of the Quran, I think, as I said earlier on, inshallah, you will enjoy this reading of the Quran. So the surah that we're going to study today is Surah Adh-Dhariyat, and this is the 51st surah of the Quran. Let me just have it displayed before you. Here is the surah just before you. This is the first part of the surah, and our custom would be that I'll read out the Arabic, the text of the surah, and one of you would read the corresponding translation, and I'll briefly explain this surah to you so that we are all able to grasp these beginnings of the surah. And remember, as I said, one of the very engaging themes of the Quran is that it talks about the past nations and makes their stories and anecdotes make the Prophet's companions and his adversaries connect with the past and see that there is a law of the Almighty. There is this unrelenting law of the Almighty in which past nations who deny their messengers are gravely punished for this doing, so that this can become proof for the hereafter, that there is going to be accountability. In other words, what you can see is that when nations are destroyed in this world, and the nations of messengers, of course, I'm speaking of, they actually show us that accountability in the hereafter is a definite thing. Why? Because if it is going to happen in this world with these nations of the world, there's all the more reason that it's going to happen for the rest of mankind to whom messengers were not directly sent, and they were not their direct addressees, that it's going to happen for them as well. Like, for example, for us who are living in the post-prophetic era. So let me start off with the Arabic of this surah, and inshallah we'll then discuss the translation and the explanation. So it says, وَالزَّارِيَاتِ زَرْوًا فَالْحَامِلَاتِ بِقْرًا فَالْجَارِيَاتِ يُسْرًا فَالْمُقَسِّمَاتِ أَمْرًا إِنَّمَا تُوعَدُونَ لَلصَّادِقِ وَإِنَّ الدِّينَ لَوَاقِعٌ وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْحُبُكِ. Okay, Ghazal, could you please help me in asking my class participants to read out the translation?
Fierce winds which scatter dust bear witness, then lift the burden of rain-laden clouds, then glide gently and distribute matters differently. They bear witness, and the striped sky too, that the scourge you are being threatened with is undeniably certain, and reward and punishment is bound to take place.
So thank you for that. Okay, as you can see, that in the Quran, you'll find out that the destruction of the past nations who denied their respected messengers often was brought about by tumultuous winds, by storms, by cyclones, by tornadoes, by typhoons, which would actually encircle that nation and totally destroy it. And this is why we find this very common style of the Quran in which these winds are actually invoked as witnesses. So in general translations, or in most translations of the Quran, you'll find that the wow here, which was Zariyat, for example, is often translated as an oath, and it would generally be translated as that these winds, by these winds, which actually means that we actually swear an oath by these winds. And I have explained this to you, that this is generally has been misunderstood, and on such occasions, it is not an oath that is being sworn in the conventional way to emphasize a statement. It is basically something that we do to bear witness, to bear evidence, and this is very common in most languages, including Arabic. So basically, when it is said that fierce winds which scatter dust, then lift the burden of rain-laden clouds and glide gently, then distribute matters differently, you can almost picturize the winds coming and then blowing in the clouds, and then those clouds bursting with rain, and then that rain wreaking havoc at certain places and destroying people there. And then again, the striped sky. Of course, the striped sky again is referring to the clouds, which are of various layers. They consist and are composed of various layers. And what does this bear witness on? I mean, all these phenomena of nature, they bear witness to إِنَّمَا تُوعَدُونَ لَصَادِقٍ. So remember, the nation of the Prophet is being addressed, the Quraysh or the Ishmaelites, who had indulged or were indulging in polytheism. And they are told that, look, what happened to the polytheistic nations of the past. The winds in their times, the clouds in their times, these agents of nature, these elements of nature, destroyed them if they persisted in this denial, in spite of being convinced. And this is going to happen again with you if you don't bend your ways. So this is precisely the evidence which you can find here. So therefore it is said that all these phenomena of nature bear witness that what you are being threatened is undeniably certain, which means that these nations were actually threatened with the fact that if they don't accept their respective messengers, of course, this means that they were fully convinced and then they denied, then this is how they are going to end up. These are the consequences that they are going to face. So this, the first paragraph actually introduces that. Okay, so let's move on. And how do we move on? Okay, here it goes. So the next paragraph is إنكم لفي قول مختلف يؤفك عنه من أفق قتل الخراصون الذين هم في غمرة ساهون يسألون أيان يوم الدين يوم هم على النار يفتنون ذوقوا فتنتكم هذا الذي كنتم به تستعجلون.
This is a fact that you are in a state of absolute contradiction. Only he who has lost his senses can evade this threat of ours. Accursed be those who wildly guess about it, who sleep in neglect, totally unaware. They ask, when will the day of judgment come? It will come on the day when they will be baked in the fire. Now taste the flavor of your mischief in which you were involved. This is the very thing you have sought to hasten.
Okay, thank you, Alicia, for that. So you see that very ominous tone, which started off in the very introductory part of the surah, is continuing. And it is telling us that, well, I mean, when I say telling us, of course, it refers to the people who are there, standing there right before the Prophet. And if you remember the last time that we talked about polytheism in our last session, I actually explained that these people were in a state of contradiction. And that contradiction was that in the first place, they thought that how can they be recreated when they become and when they decay into dust and mud and their bones are totally dissolved in dust. And then at the same time, they thought, well, maybe this is true. And if it is true, then the deities and the idols that they are worshipping, they will save them. So this, you see, on the one hand, they deny the day of judgment, and on the other hand, they even acknowledged it. So this was a form of contradiction which they were in. And referring to this form, the Quran tells us that you have lost your senses, you people. And if you have lost your senses, then remember that your fate is going to be very, very stern. You'll be treated extremely harshly. One can only imagine. I mean, look at what the Quran says, يَوْمَ هُمْ عَلَى النَّارِ يُفْتَنُونَ. It will come on the day, that punishment will come on the day when they will be baked in the fire. Now taste the flavor. I mean, it is as if they are being addressed directly and they are being told. In the previous sentences, you could see that there was an indirect sort of a narration, and suddenly the narration has become direct, as if they are being addressed right in front of them, and they are being told that now you face this punishment. So another thing that I'd like to explain here is that the messengers of God, when they came to their respective nations, they often threatened them with two punishments. One of them was the worldly punishment, which would, of course, destroy them, as was the case with these previous nations. And the other was that this punishment would continue until the day of judgment. So when they are in barzakh, which means before they are actually resurrected on the day of judgment, during that period also, that punishment will continue on them. And when they are risen up, when they rise up on the day of judgment, then that too will be a punishment that's going to continue. So you see, this was a punishment which the prophets of God, the messengers of God among them, always threatened them. They told them that not only in this world would you be facing this fury of God, but in the hereafter as well. So another thing that I'd like to explain here is, you see, in conventional translations, you often see the word, the translation is mostly done in this masculine gender. For example, when it is said, only he who has lost his senses can evade this threat of ours. Of course, this does not mean that the Almighty is just talking about men. No, this is a way of the Quran that it speaks in the masculine gender. And that doesn't mean that the feminine gender or women are not addressed. This is just a way of speaking. In past scriptures and even in today's literature, you'll find man being addressed. I mean, man as a gender being addressed, but it's a generic address, and that generic address actually refers to both men and women. So man is like a translation of the word human being. So when it says he, the word he actually refers to a human being. And because of the fact that human beings are both men and women, so both are implied here. So this is something which is, of course, in order that I should have explained, because you see, because of this feminist outset or mindset, what happens is that people think that perhaps there is this bias towards the male gender in the Quran, because it always speaks of he and him instead of she and her. So, as I said, this is more a case of the translation. Actually, men and women both are addressed. It's just that the Quran had to use one gender, and it chose one of those genders which are generally adopted in our books, in our literature as well. So it's more to do with the convention rather than towards any discrimination or bias towards the masculine gender. Okay. So let's move on to the third part. It says, "Innal muttaqina fi jannatin wa uyun, akhizina ma atahum rabbuhum, innahum kanu qabla zalika muhsinin, kanu qalilan min al-layli ma yahja'un, wa bil ashari hum yastaghfirun, wa fi amwalihim haqqun lis-sa'ili wal mahrum."
However, the righteous on that day will be among orchards and springs, receiving what has been bestowed on them by their Lord. Before this, they were thorough in their deeds. They would sleep very little at night, and in its final hours would seek forgiveness from their Lord. And in their wealth was share for those who ask and are deprived.
So thank you, Almira, for this reading. As you would see, I mean, as you study the text of the Quran and as we study the other surahs, you'll find that this is a very common style of the Quran, that when it speaks of the sinners and the ill-doers and the wrongdoers and describes their punishment, immediately after that, often the fate of the righteous is depicted. And this fate is generally depicted how they will dwell in paradise and how they would be served and how they would be so happy and elated. So basically, the paragraph that we have studied today, just now, is a parallel to the previous paragraph in which the sinners were discussed, and now immediately after them, the fate of the righteous is discussed. And you can clearly see that this fate again has a ring of what we can imagine the Arabs of those times to be addressed of. Because you see, as I said earlier on, that the Quran addresses the Arabs of the times of the Prophet, and to them, of course, orchards and springs and fountains and mountains and all these areas of the seaside and the countryside were so enchanting, and they always relished them. So as a reward, the picture of paradise that has been portrayed before them is something which is according to their imagination and according to what they relish and cherish. This also shows how the Quran is specific regarding its addressees. Of course, as individuals amongst us who are righteous, for us, the Quran has just made this remark, a passing remark at various instances, although it's not made here, but it's understood. And that is that for other people and for those who would be there, they will get whatever they desire. So they will, I mean, people like today, if they want whatever they want, whatever they relish today, would be given to them. But of course, that could not have been described 14 centuries ago, because, as I said, for them, the addressees, they had to be told what they liked best. And this automatically implies that all the rest of mankind in their ages, whatever they think is nice for them would be given to them. So, and you see, one other thing that is spelled out here is that why are they given these gifts and favors of God? And these verses actually describe that. It says that innahum kanu qabla zalika muhsinin, that these were the people who were thorough in their deeds. Now, muhsin, which actually is from Ahsan, is a very special word of the Quran and used a lot. It says that you're a thorough person. you are not just doing something for the sake of it. You're beyond the call of your duty. You do something in a very, very effective way, as if your heart is into it. It's not just going about the motions. It's like being totally involved and doing something in its best way. So this is something which is the Quran asks us to do, not only to discharge our duties, but to discharge them in a beautiful way, in a befitting way, in a way that it really, really feels as if we are doing something with our heart's content. And another quality which is mentioned here is قَانُوا قَلِيلًا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ مَا يَهْجَعُونَ, that these believers would sleep little at night. Of course, this refers to the tahajjud prayer or the night prayer that we often are able to offer in Ramadan, in Sehri time. And Ramadan, by the way, is just around the corner as well. So it's like something that is a reminder for us as well, that during the purpose here is that all the year round, believers, they get up at night and they pray to God, they talk to Him, they discuss things with Him. Of course, this is not a compulsory thing, but this is one of the aspects of being muhsin. I mean, to do something in an elaborate way. You're not just discharging your duties as common Muslims and just praying 5 times a day, but every once in a while. Well, here it is. The objective is that you do it quite a lot. But if that is not possible, then every once in a while you get up before the Fajr prayer and talk to God, because this is the time when the Almighty says that I'm much more focused. I'm the most focused beings, and if they ask something from me, I'll give it to them, if it's, of course, in accordance with my justice and plan. So this is the time that you can talk to God, invoke God, and all that you want from God to happen. This is and of course, wabil asharihum yastaghfirun, which means those who seek forgiveness for the Almighty when they get up early in the night. And وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. Of course, this is again a very important thing, that they have a fixed share in their wealth for the deprived. So the zakat is actually being referred here, that all of us who earn, all of us who are in a position, we have to be charitable towards others. And as you would be knowing, that this is something which the Quran speaks about a lot. It speaks of our connection with God, and it speaks of our connection with the society that we live in. And the best connection with our society is to remain connected with the needy and the orphans and the widows and the paupers and all people that you see are in distress, and to spend on them, to give them time, to smile at them, to use your skills, if you are able to, in trying to alleviate their sufferings. Okay, let's move ahead. وَفِي الْأَرْضِ آيَاتٌ لِلْمُوقِنِينَ وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ فَوَرَبِّ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ إِنَّهُ لَحَقٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أَنَّكُمْ تَنطِقُونَ.
Not only in the winds and the clouds. For those who want to have conviction, there are signs in the earth also, and in yourselves too. Do you then not see? And there is in the heavens your sustenance also, and that too about which you are being threatened with. Thus, by the Lord of the heavens and the earth, its advent is as certain as the way you speak.
So, thank you for that, Amira. Again, you see that the discourse is continuing. Remember, the basic stress of the surah is to substantiate the day of judgment, to tell people who were right there in front of them, and of course, indirectly to us as well, that don't think that the day of judgment is not going to come. Look what happened to the past nations and how they were destroyed, and look what the fate of the righteous is going to be. And now this discourse continues, and it says that it's not just in the winds and the clouds which destroyed people. You find signs of the day of judgment in our own selves. And do we not see, when it says on our own selves, of course, the primary reference is to our conscience. You see, a conscience tells us there is going to be an accountability. Otherwise, there was no need for the Almighty to place conscience in ourselves. So when it says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ, it means in your own selves also. أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ, don't you see? So the reference is that your own inner person who relishes what right is, and who is actually disturbed at doing wrong, his or her conscience does not like it. It tells us that accountability is a very important thing before the Almighty. And then, وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ. Of course, this refers to the system of sustenance which the Almighty has set up for us. The rain comes down, it brings uh, ultimately it brings fodder for us, because the rain actually produces those crops, and those crops, of course, become food for us. And then it says, "Ma tu'adun." Of course, as I said, this is reference to the people of the idolaters of Arabia in the times of the Prophet. Remember, they were threatened that if they don't accept their messenger, then they'll be punished in the way their previous nations were. So this is referring to that threat. And then it says, فَوَرَبِّ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ إِنَّهُ لَحَقٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أَنَّكُمْ تَنْطِقُونَ. Now, this is a very special uh, argument offered by the Almighty. It says, well, why do you think that creating mankind is a difficult thing? Because, as I said earlier on, this was one of the contentions of the idolaters of Arabia, and they thought that creating mankind again is simply impossible. How can the Almighty do so? And the Almighty actually says here, and this is the earth that you can clearly see, that by the Lord of the heavens and the earth, this is something which is bound to happen, and this is so easy for God. I mean, to bring about the day of judgment, to destroy this world and create another world, is so easy for the Almighty, just as it is easy for us to speak. We don't have to put in any effort when I speak and when you speak. It just comes out of us automatically. We think and then we start speaking. So the Almighty says that you people don't think that's difficult for me to recreate mankind. It's as easy for me to recreate mankind as it is easy for you to just utter a word. Okay, let's move on. And now we have a historical anecdote, which is a very interesting one, and maybe you have studied this before as well. So it starts off with the guests of Abraham, and the anecdote, of course, is of Abraham. It says, "Hal ataka hadithu zayfi Ibrahim al-mukramin iz dakhalu alayhi faqalu salama qala salamun qawmun munkarun." فراغ إلى أهله فجاء بعجل سمين فقربه إليهم قال ألا تأكلون فأوجس منهم خيفة قالوا لا تخف وبشروه بغلام عليم فأقبلت امرأته في سرة فسكت وجهها وقالت عجوز عقيم قالوا كذلك قال ربك إنه هو الحكيم العليم قال فما خطبكم أيها المرسلون قالوا إنا أرسلنا إلى قوم مجرمين لنرسل عليهم حجارة من طين مسومة عند ربك للمسرفين فأخرجنا من كان فيها من المؤمنين فما وجدنا فيها غير بيت من المسلمين وتركنا فيها آية للذين يخافون العذاب الأليم.
Signs of this also exist in history. Has the tale of the honored guests of Abraham reached you? When they came to him, they said, "Peace be to you. Peace be to you too." He answered, "These folks seem to be strangers." He then secretively went to his family and brought for them the roasted meat of a fatted calf and placed it before them. But they refrained from eating it. He said, "Why are you people not eating?" Then, seeing their hesitation, he felt some fear for them in his heart. "Fear not," said they, and gave him glad tidings of a son blessed with knowledge. Hearing this, his wife came forward in astonishment and smote her forehead, and cried, "An old barren woman will produce a child? This is precisely what your Lord has said." They replied, "He is all-wise, all-knowing." Abraham asked, "Then, O messengers, what at present is your mission?" They replied, "We have been sent to a sinful people, so that we may hurl upon them stones of clay, marked by your Lord for those who exceed limits." Then, as we evacuated from that settlement all the believers, we found there but one house of those who were Muslims. Then we unleashed those stones, and we left it in a great sign as a lesson for those who fear in grievous penalty.
Okay, thank you for that, Daniel. You see, as you can see, the surah now progresses and says that, remember earlier on, it said that as far as accountability is concerned, You'll find it writ large everywhere in the universe. The winds, the storms that came, the clouds which came, and then, of course, our own conscience and the fact that there is this system of sustenance which tells us that God is going to hold us accountable. After that, there is another sign which is presented, and that is look at how the Almighty dealt with those people who denied. And here you will find that the angels had come in the form of people, in the form of human beings, to Abraham to give him glad tidings of his son Isaac, of course, who was born of Sarah. And of course, this happened after the birth of Ishmael, who was born of Hagar or Hajra, as we know. And of course, this happened when these angels came to him, and when this did not eat, they thought that, well, I mean, Abraham thought, well, this is something which is very strange because it is known that the angels generally don't eat the way we eat, and there must be something wrong. And he later on understood that there was, of course, this thing in which he had misunderstood them to be human beings. They were, in fact, human beings, but they were actually angels who had come in the form of human beings. And one of their purposes was to give glad tidings of a second son to Abraham. And her wife, his wife, actually, Sarah said, by smiting her head like this, well, how can I give birth to someone when I am a barren old woman? And these angels said, well, this is how your Almighty has meant. And then Abraham realized, well, this is not just their only mission, and perhaps they do have another mission at hand. And so Abraham asked them that, what at present is your mission besides giving me this glad news that I'm going to have another son? Uh, these angels replied, well, we have also been sent to Lot. Now, Lot was a nephew of Prophet Abraham, and he lived very near where Abraham used to live. And we know that the nation or the people of Lot had denied them. They had also indulged in a very shameful act, in spite of the warnings from Lot. So these angels said that after giving you these glad tidings, we are now going to set off towards the land where Lot is living, which was very near where Abraham was living. So he was his brother's son, his nephew. Lot was Abraham's nephew, actually. And they said, well, we are now going to destroy Lot's nation because of this heinous act. Although that heinous act is not described here, but remember, as I said, that the Quran does not always describe all details at one place. We know from other places in the Quran that these were the people who had denied their prophet, who had indulged in polytheism, and also were guilty of this shameful act. So they were destroyed with these stones. And we know that Lot's wife also was destroyed as a result, and she was part of the nation. So this is how this passage has unfolded itself, by telling us the tale of Abraham. And one thing you can see is the hospitality which Abraham actually offered. So the word to note here is a very subtle area. It says that he quietly left these guests, secretively went to his family. I mean, he did not make his guests realize that he's going to throw a party for them, or maybe a meal for them. And in those times, a fatted calf, of course, was a delight. So they feasted on them. I mean, at least he bought that meat for his guests. But when his guests did not touch the meat, he was a little, scared. And he said that, why is it that they are not eating? And it is then that they disclosed who they were. And they were angels who had come for this purpose, not only for this purpose to convey glad tidings of a son, but also to tell him that here is going to be another thing that they're going to do. On the one hand, they are giving these glad tidings of a son to Abraham, but simultaneously, they are going to go to his nephew Lot, who lives in the nearby land, and destroy the nation of Lot because they were guilty of transgression. And as you can see that this is something which is already, although described in a little concise way in the Quran. If you read the Bible, you'll find out that Abraham actually talked to God at this instance, and he said that, God, why would you punish my nephew and his nation if even there are 50 righteous people there? And it is said that God replied back and said, well, they are not even 50. And then he actually started reducing the number, and ultimately it came to 10. And the Almighty said, well, there are not even 10 among them, actually signifying the fact that this is how the number of people who have denied Lot and who've denied Lot and the Almighty have been reduced to. So this is what we call the very very affectionate way of Abraham, so rampant and so found in abundance in the Quran and in the Bible, in which he would try to stop God from punishing his people, or at least ask him. And the Almighty had to actually satisfy him that why he is destroying this nation of Lot, because there are less than even 10 people who are righteous, and even less than them. And of course, this is what the Almighty says, that when the whole nation becomes corrupt like this, then there's no other option left for him. Okay, now this was the historical part. Let's now move on to another his part of history. It says, ففي موسى إذ أرسلنا إلى فرعون بسلطان مبين فتولى بركنه وقال ساحر أو مجنون فأخذناه وجنوده فنبذناهم في اليم وهو مليم.
In the tale of Moses also is this very sign when we sent him forth to the Pharaoh with a proof manifest, yet he turned his back in arrogance and cried, he is a sorcerer or one possessed. The result of this was that we seized him and his forces threw him into the sea, and he ended up blameworthy.
Thank you, Iman, for that translation. So you see, now comes up another tale. So we just had the story of Abraham, and immediately after that, the story of Lot. And because of the fact that the Quran is recounting historical anecdotes, it then takes up the story of Moses. And here you can see that there are just about 3 verses which speak of the story of Moses. But the story of Moses is discussed in such a lot of detail in various other surahs of the Quran. So one thing that you will slowly become used to is that these stories of previous prophets, at times they are just touched upon in one surah and elaborated in another surah. And similarly, the various details are found in various surahs. And to have a whole picture of a particular anecdote of a prophet of God, it's always the best that you gather all the details from all the places where it's discussed. And the reason why it is discussed concisely at one place and comprehensively at another place is that whatever is requirement of the theme of that surah. Remember, each surah has a theme. Each surah has a particular direction in which it wants to take its addressees. So, keeping in view the need of the theme, the details of the surahs or the details of the anecdotes of the prophets of God are discussed at times sparingly, at times in detail, at times concisely. So we find here the tale of Musa or Moses being discussed very concisely in just about 3 verses. And the sign that is actually here mentioned here, of course, all of you know that Moses was sent to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh, of course, was a person who, in spite of the fact that Moses showed him those miracles, he denied him. And then you know what? There was a period in which Moses was shown these miracles, and he would initially at times he would accept the ruling of Moses, or he would acquiesce. He would accept, okay, I'm going to believe in your God. And when those trials and tribulations which Moses or the Almighty had put them through would go away, once again they would turn their backs. So this to and fro nature of faith and faithlessness went on amongst the followers of the Pharaoh. But ultimately, what happened was that he said, okay, because basically when Moses had come to the Pharaoh, his basic demand was to let the Israelites go with him. And it is actually speculated and researched that actually it was Moses who wanted them to take them to the Baytullah, or the house of God, for Hajj, as some researchers have posited. So the Pharaoh ultimately agreed, and he allowed Moses and his followers to leave Israel, that land. And suddenly he changed his mind and started following him. And then the Almighty actually unleashed a huge wind. We know that when Moses and his army were crossing the Red Sea, this huge wind actually parted the sea into 2. And this took place by the touch of Moses' staff or his rod. He touched the sea, and this huge wind actually started blowing, and it blew in such a fashion that wind force actually made the sea split, and then Moses was able to pass through that Red Sea onto the next shore. And by the time the Pharaoh and his followers were crossing the Red Sea, the Almighty stopped that wind, and as a result, the sea, which had been parted, it became one, and the Pharaoh and his followers were drowned. And at other places, we know that at such a time, the Pharaoh actually said that I profess faith in the God of Moses, and the Almighty said, well, this is not the time. Once you see the punishment, and then you profess faith, then it is of no use. So precisely this whole tale has been summed up in just these three verses, that when he denied, he let them go, and when he followed them, the Almighty destroyed them. So once again, this is a proof of the fact that those people who destroy, who actually oppose their prophet knowingly, they are destroyed. So this is another tale that you can just see has been mentioned in the Quran, and again refer back to the fact that basically the Quraysh, or the nation of the Prophet, are being recounted these details of the past nations, that look how the Almighty dealt with them and destroyed them for their denial. And if you people continue with your denial, you'll be faced with something similar. But as I've explained earlier also, that the Prophet's nation, or a very, very large part of the Prophet's nation, actually accepted faith. So they never got this punishment of destruction, barring a few of them. So let's now move on to the next part, and that is, or have we read this translation? Oh yes, we have. Okay, so next part is the discussion of another nation which was destroyed, and this is the nation of Ad, and to them the prophet Hud was sent. So the words are, وَفِي عَادٍ إِذْ أَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمُ الرِّيحَ الْأَقِيمَ مَا تَذَرُ مِنْ شَيْءٍ أَتَتْ عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا جَعَلَتْهُ كَالرَّمِيمِ وَفِي ثَمُودَ إِذْ قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَمَتَّعُوا حَتَّى حِينٍ فَعَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الصَّاعِقَةُ وَهُمْ يَنْظُرُونَ فَمَا اسْتَطَاعُوا مِنْ قِيَامٍ وَمَا كَانُوا مُنْتَصِرِينَ.
And in the tale of Ad too, there is this very sign when we unleashed on them a devastating dry wind, and it reduced to powder everything over which it swept. And this same sign is in the tale of the Thamud also, when it was said to them, "Enjoy yourselves for a while." But even after this warning, they turned away and defied. So they were struck by a thunderbolt whilst they looked on. Then they were neither able to get up, nor could they save themselves.
So thank you for that, Fatma or Riba. Again, as I said, the tale of Ad and the tale of Samud, these were the two ancient nations of Arabia. And their ruins actually still existed in the times of Prophet Muhammad, because the trade routes on which the Quraysh used to pass by to take their merchandise to other countries, they fell on these ruins of these nations, and they were very well known in history to the Quraysh, to the nation of the Prophet, that there was this nation of Ad and there was this nation of Samud. To Ad, we know that the Prophet Hud was sent, and to the Samud, we know that the Prophet Saleh was sent, but both of them were denied. And one of the features of both Ad and Samud was that they had made tremendous advancements and developments in constructional feats. So they would build huge palaces and huge colosseums and auditoriums, and carve out houses from rocks. And so they had a lot of skill in this, and they were also very tall people. And the Quran has told us at each of these instances, for both of these nations, that both of them actually ended up negating and rejecting their messengers, and so the Almighty destroyed them. So remember, the sequence of events is that we are discussing how the Almighty is trying to tell us that there is going to be a day of accountability in the hereafter, because this day of accountability existed for nations of the prophets of the world in the prophetic era. So we've discussed, for example, Abraham, Lot, and then Moses, and now Ad and Samud. So all these, although they are not in historical sequence, they are more in sequence with the theme of the surah. You'll find that the basic premise that is being established is that all these nations met a particular fate if they denied their messenger, and this is going to happen to the Quraysh, or the tribe of the Prophet. So the tribe of the Prophet was the tribe of Quraysh, and if they do the same thing, they'll be they'll meet the same fate as well. Okay, and then says وَقَوْمَ نُوحٍ مِّن قَبْلِ إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ والسماء بنيناها بأيد وإنا لموسعون والأرض فرشناها فنعم الماهدون ومن كل شيء خلقنا زوجين لعلكم تذكرون ففروا إلى الله إني لكم منه نذير مبين ولا تجعلوا مع الله إلها آخر إني لكم منه نذير مبين.
For this we similarly seized the folks of Noah too. Certainly they too were a disobedient people. Then what is the difficulty for us to recreate them? Do you not see that? We have built the heavens with our enormous might, and we have a lot of capacity. And we have spread out the earth, so how excellently do we spread out? And we have created everything in pairs, so that you may receive a reminder. Therefore run towards God. I am from him an open warmer for you. And set up no deity besides God. When the day of judgment comes, none of them will be of avail to you. I am from him an open warner of this fact too.
So you see, as you can see, the anecdotes of the past prophets have finished here with the mention of very brief mention of the prophet Noah. This is just one verse, and as I said, in other parts of the Quran, you have a much more detailed account of Noah being given. In fact, we have a complete surah of the Quran, which is called Surah Nuh, which deals with the nation of Noah, and all the details are mentioned there. But here, just one sentence is actually mentioned, and that is that, like these previous nations, the nation of Noah also denied them. And for him, we know from other parts of the Quran that he spent 950 years, so 950 years amongst his people to warn them. And he saw many generations. Of course, you can imagine several generations, maybe 25 or 30 of them, growing up in front of Noah, or maybe less if the ages were much more. But you can clearly see that these nations, all of them, as Noah made this remark in one of the surahs as well, they continued this denial and they were ultimately taken to task. But as I said, here just one verse is mentioned. And then you see the surah once again starts off with a new topic. You can see that as soon as the nations of these prophets of God have finished, we find a paragraph, another paragraph, which now takes up the whole theme of the surah in a different way. And that is the possibility of the Almighty making the day of judgment happen. So remember, one of the greatest things which continued to boggle the Quraysh or the Bani Ismail or the idolaters was that how can the Almighty recreate this whole expanse? How can he recreate the earth and the heavens? So we find this reasoning coming back every now and then regarding the power of the Almighty, the strength of the Almighty, to tell them that how it is easy for them to recreate mankind. And it is precisely this which is mentioned when it says that we created, the Almighty says that we created, and when it says we, of course, it refers to himself. And this is the way to magnify and to express the power of the Almighty. In ancient languages, the plural we would be used for God, always been used for God, to express his might, to express his strength. So it's by expressing the might of the Almighty, the Quran says that we, of course, referring to God, that we have made this sky, this heaven, these heavens with our hand, which of course means that no material was required for that. And وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ, and we have a lot of power. So if this is the case, then how do they think that we are not able to make them create again or have them created again? And remember, you see, there were a lot of people amongst these Ishmaelites who were standing on the borders. So there were these arrogant leaders who had that vehement denial written large on their faces. And then there were these weak people among them. The people, many of them were actually inclined towards Islam. So you can see that the reasoning which the Quran offers actually is meant for those people who had already softened, who were already soft from inside, but they were not finding a way to accept Islam because their own leaders were not letting them do so. So in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, this happened that in the very first battle, which is the Battle of Badr, most of the Quraysh leaders had died, making it possible for their common man to contemplate on the reasoning offered by the Quran. So once the leaders of they had died in the Battle of Badr, of course, referring to the leaders of the Quraysh, because they had attacked Medina where the Prophet was living, and you know that Abu Jahl, Utbah, Shayba, many of their senior leaders had met their fate in the Battle of Badr, and this opened the way for the common man to reflect. So this reasoning that you can see being made by the Quran is actually meant for those people who were still inclined to think once they had lost their leaders and once they were given this freedom. I mean, they could breathe in freedom to choose, and this is why, my dear friends, that a large majority of the nation of the Prophet actually accepted faith. Only their top leaders were killed in battles, but a very vast majority, they succumbed to this reasoning of the Quran, and they thought, well, okay, if the Almighty is telling us that He is one God and the hereafter is got to come, then there is some truth in it. In fact, there is absolute truth in it. And one of the reasons which the Almighty has offered here is وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, that everything has been made in pairs by the Almighty. And you know what? The reference here is that a single member is incomplete without its pair. For example, a man is incomplete without a woman. Night is incomplete without the day. The sun is incomplete without the moon, etc. And this herein, this world is incomplete without the hereafter. So the Almighty tells us that everything has been made in pairs. Even the world has been made in pairs. So one part of the pair, that pair, is this world, and the other part is the next world. And together they make a whole reality. Because if you consider this world without the hereafter, you'll find it to be a meaningless place in which oppression, injustice, they make hay, they rule the world. And if you view this world with the next world, and also view the philosophy of the Quran, that this is a place of trial and test, and ultimately results will come out in the next world, then it makes complete sense. The two worlds, when they come together, they make complete sense. But in the absence of the next world, this world actually does not make any sense. And it is precisely to this fact that the Quran is referring here when it says that I have made everything in pairs. The Almighty says everything exists in pairs, and the pair of this world is the next world. And that is why it says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, maybe you find heed. You are able to reflect on this premise and find heed. Okay, we are coming close to the ending part of this surah, and as we go along, again we have another detail coming up, and one of these details is often a very common feature of the Quran, that it assures the Prophet. Remember, the Prophet was a human being, and all sorts of emotions and feelings would also haunt him at times. He would feel uncomfortable, he would feel sad, he would feel very, very put off, and especially his nation would call him by various names. And the Almighty had to give him this assurance, well, don't worry about them, I'll take care of them, you go on doing your duty. Again, telling us that how human the Prophet Muhammad was, and he would feel these things when he would be called names. So here goes the next part. It says, كَذَلِكَ مَا أَتَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا قَالُوا سَاحِرٌ أَوْ مَجْنُونٌ أَتَوَاصَوْا بِهِ بَلْ هُمْ قَوْمٌ طَاغُونَ فَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ فَمَا أَنْتَ بِمَلُومٍ وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ.
Rest assured, O Prophet, this has continued to happen. Whenever a messenger came to their predecessors, they similarly called him a sorcerer or one possessed. Have they been making the same will to one another? No. In fact, they are but a people rebellious, so ignore them. There is no blame on you now, and keep on reminding because reminding benefits those who believe.
So thank you for that, Mustafa. You see, clearly here, you can see that the Almighty is sounding assurance to Prophet Muhammad. As I said, Prophet Muhammad was a human being. Of course, he was a prophet also. He was a messenger of God. But in spite of that, he had those human emotions. And he would be called a possessed person. He would be called a sorcerer. He would be called a madman. All these titles were given to Prophet Muhammad. And here the Almighty is assuring him and telling him, well, this is not anything new. Precisely the same titles were bestowed by the nations of various other messengers of God. And it seems as if they have made this will to their succeeding nations to behave the same way. and the reason actually is that they are people rebellious. So therefore, look what the Prophet is being told here. فَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ فَمَا أَنْتَ بِمَلُومٍ. You just turn away from them. You just ignore them. And there is no blame on you because you've done your job. And your job, and what is your job? Just keep reminding the believers. Even if these disbelievers start calling you by these painful names, just ignore them because the Almighty is going to take care of them. As far as He is concerned, the Prophet should keep on reminding the believers because reminding these believers is going to be beneficial for them. Okay, so we now come to the ending verses of the surah, and as I said, that they have started, of course, in the last in the slide before after this one, the surah is going to end, and the words are وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ مَا أُرِيدُ مِنْهُمْ مِنْ رِزْقٍ وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ يُطْعِمُونَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الرَّزَّاقُ ذُو الْقُوَّةِ الْمَتِينُ.
Leave these rebellious people to themselves now. I have created the jinn and men only for my worship, and this is what is required of them as well. I seek no sustenance from them, nor do I want that they should feed me. God Himself is the provider, the Almighty, and the extremely powerful.
Thank you, Nida. So, as the surah is drawing to a close, the Almighty again is that the assurance that He sounded in the previous verses is continuing, and He's telling the Prophet that just ignore these rebellious people and just think that the reason that the Almighty has created men and jinn is that they behave as human beings, not as idols, not as gods themselves. His reason of creating human beings is that they behave as human beings and acknowledge their creator. The Almighty does not want any sustenance from them. He's not like a person who needs anything, as was the case which they thought. The idolaters, they thought that all their deities need food and sustenance. And if you read the history of idolatry, you'll find them presenting these various foods to their deities, thinking that they are going to consume them. So the Almighty is telling these people that, remember, if I have created you, I am your God. You're not. You should not think that I am the God the way your gods are, who need all these foods for their sustenance. Your job is to behave as a creation of mine and regard me as your creator. And then it says that God Himself is the mighty and the extremely powerful. If you realize this, you'll realize everything, that the day of judgment is going to come. Okay. So we are. So there is this next slide, of course, which is telling us something very similar. And as I see the next slide, okay, this is the slide on which the surah is going to end. So this is the last. These are the last two verses of the surah, actually. And if I read them, you'll find out how actually it refers to the fact that the surah started off in a very ominous way in actually telling these disbelievers that there is going to be a day of judgment for them in this very world. And in the closing part of this surah, you'll find the surah reverting to the same topic with which it began. So the verses are فَإِنَّ لِلَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا ذَنُوبًا مِثْلَ ذَنُوبِ أَصْحَابِهِمْ فَلَا يَسْتَعْجِلُونَ فَوَيْلٌ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ يَوْمِهِمُ الَّذِي يُوعَدُونَ.
Give them more respite, because for these wrongdoers also there is a time fixed like that of their earlier companions. So they should not ask me to hasten it. For these disbelievers there is great destruction at last on account for their day of which they are being warned.
Okay, thank you, Rian. So as you can see that this note of assurance which started a couple of verses ago is still continuing. And the Prophet is being told by the Almighty that you give them respite. You ignore them and give them respite. You concentrate on the believers and remind them. Because as far as these disbelievers are concerned, these wrongdoers are concerned, there is a time for them fixed. The Almighty is not going to immediately destroy them. He is going to give them time, like He gave time to earlier peoples, because there are all kinds of people in this group. There are some people who are going to soften and they might even accept faith. So the Almighty prolongs this time. And this is, of course, a mercy, an act of mercy from the Almighty, that in spite of deserving punishment, He gives them more time to contemplate, to reflect, to maybe turn and walk towards the Almighty, and there is no hurry in that. But ultimately, it says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ يَوْمِهِمُ الَّذِي يُوعَدُونَ, that if they still persist with their denial, if they still persist with their wrong ways, then there is going to be destruction for them. And if you start off the surah, remember, the beginning of the surah was no different. And you can clearly see that the beginning was something in which, of course, once again, the same punishment which is now mentioned here in this closing part was referred to, and which tells us how the Quran starts off and ends with the same theme, which further tells us how a surah is sequentially arranged. So today you can see that the Surah Adh-Dhariyat, the 51st surah that we studied, of course, was once again directed towards the idolaters, telling them how the past, the history of the past nations tells them that they will be destroyed if they don't accept the Prophet, and of course accepting them after they are convinced of him. And then there were other reasons given, and of course the might of the Prophet, of the Almighty himself, the system of sustenance that he has actually structured in our universe. All this shows that the Almighty is going to make that day of judgment happen again. Oh, so thank you very much for going through this translation. I do hope that you enjoyed reading through the Quran, especially knowing that it had this detail about a certain nation who was the nation of the Prophet. And if you know the characteristics of the nation of the Prophet, you will understand why the Quran continuously speaks about it. Okay, before we sign off, I would just like to ask a few questions from maybe the last session that we have, those of you who are present. So remember, in the last session, we discussed Surah Qaf, which was the 50th surah of the Quran. And there was this verse in the Quran which said that we have created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. And then it said, we never got tired. So does any one of you remember what I had explained at that time, that why did the Almighty had to point this out, that I never got tired of after creating mankind in 6 days? Any particular reason? I think I did allude to the reason. Does any one of you remember why the Quran had to specify that the Almighty never was tired after creating mankind? Anyone? Remember the verse was, وَمَا مَسَّنَا مِن لُغُوبٍ, and no weariness, no tiredness came upon me. Okay, in case you've forgotten, the reference was to the Bible actually. So remember, in the Bible, the Quran says that, the historians of the Bible, I would say, they had recorded the fact that the Almighty created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th day. Remember that? This is the story of the Bible of creation, and you'll find it in the very first chapter, which is the book of Genesis. The first two chapters discuss this. And the historians of the Bible, the way they have described this whole event needed correction. So one of the things that the Quran does is corrects the anecdotes of the Bible if they have been wrongly recorded. So the Almighty said in this Quran that no weariness came upon me. I was not tired. And of course, the reference was that, well, the previous scriptures apparently tell their people that he got tired after 6 days of creation, and on the 7th day he rested. So keep this in mind, my dear friends and my dear participants, that many a time the Quran makes references to past history. And one of the things that the Quran persistently does is that it corrects these events. So most of these events that you'll find in the Quran, these prophetic stories, for example, the story of Moses has been discussed in such detail in the previous scriptures, in the Old Testament. But there has been a lot of interpolation, and historians and Jewish history has crept into it, and you'll find it has been tampered with. So on these occasions, the Quran actually interrupts and tells us, without at times even referring to the Bible. It'll just go on and state the whole thing in a very positive way, so that people realize, those people who are already aware of that wrong history, well, this is not the case. And the second thing, if you remember, I explained in my last session was that These 6 days are the days of the Almighty. They are not our days. I mean, these 24 hours are human days. These are days of planet Earth. So the days of the Almighty, the length of those days is very different. So we have the Quran telling us that at times one day of the Almighty equals 50,000 human years, and at times it equals 1,000 human years. So you see, 100,000 human years. So you see, this is something which you have to understand, that as far as the Quran is concerned, it keeps on correcting the past scriptures, and it also tells us that creation is something which, of course, the Almighty did in a very elaborate way. I mean, if he had to construct something for his own amusement, he wouldn't have gone through all these motions and all these pains of, I mean, attempting to create and then showing this power of creativity to such an extent that he has created this universe, and a better part of this universe is uninhabited. Very, very few, according to the Quran, there are 6 more earths like the Quran, which are supposed to be inhabited by other life forms. As yet, science has not been able to discover them, but the Quran has told us that there are 7 heavens, and each heaven has an earth like us. So even if that is accepted, still the vast expanse of the stars and cosmos and all these planetary movements and heavenly bodies do create this question, that why is it that the Almighty has created all this, because it is seemingly of no use. And this question has also been tackled by the Quran at one place, and the Almighty says, well, this stuff is the stuff from which we are going to create that new world in the hereafter. So the Quran says on one place that these very heavens and these very earths that you see, they are going to be reassembled, and the day of judgment and the next world is going to be created from this very stuff. So don't think that the Almighty is creating something for no use. The heavens which are spread over you, the stars and the heavenly bodies, all of them is the stuff for the next world. He's going just going to rearrange them in a different way, and the next world would be created. So thank you very much for being with us in this surah reading session. I do hope that this reading actually sparked a few questions of your interest. And inshallah, next week we'll be back with another surah. And until then, it is Khuda Hafiz from your teacher.